My boss reported to management that I had mental health problems using private conversations I had told her. I found out at a promotion meeting. What I found when I started looking almost cost me my career. There is information you share with someone at work because the context makes it seem safe. Not because you are naive, but because in certain environments vulnerability presents itself as part of a trust relationship, and it is difficult to distinguish in real time between a genuinely safe space and one that has another function. My boss had built that kind of relationship with me. Conversations in her office with the door closed where she asked me how I was doing for real, where I had told her things that in retrospect I should not have told in a work environment. Not because they had been devastating secrets, but because there had been moments of stress, uncertainty, personal difficulty that I had verbalized in her presence with the trust of someone who believes that information stays where it is left. And she had taken them to management, had turned them into evidence of something they were not. And I had found out at a meeting where the human resources director mentioned something he should not have known. My name is Sophia. I am 35 years old. I am a senior strategy analyst at a financial services company, and I have spent 6 years at the same institution where in the last 2, I had built a performance record I would have described as the best of my career up to that point. My boss's name was Claudia. She was 48 years old. She had spent 12 years at the company. She was the director of my area. The meeting that changed everything was convened by the human resources director to discuss my candidacy for a higher-level position I had applied for 3 weeks earlier. The meeting was with him and with a director from another area who would potentially be my supervisor in the new role. Everything indicated it was a progress conversation in the process. I arrived with the energy of someone who has prepared their candidacy well and expects a technical conversation about the role. The human resources director started with the positive aspects of my profile. Then he said there were some areas they wanted to explore. And among those areas, he mentioned that he had received information that I had had periods of emotional instability in the last year that raised questions about whether I was ready for a higher pressure role. I sat looking at him. I asked him where that information came from. He visibly became uncomfortable. He told me, from an internal source, he preferred not to name at that moment. I told him that information was incorrect, that I had not had any period of emotional instability that had affected my work, that I needed to know where it came from because it had direct consequences for my candidacy. The meeting ended without a clear answer to that question. I left with the certainty that there was a conversation about me in some space I did not have access to. That afternoon, I did not go directly to Claudia. What I did was call a friend who works in human resources at another company and who has the kind of practical perspective on organizational dynamics I needed before acting. Her name was Patricia. I described to her what had happened in the meeting. Patricia asked me a direct question. Was there anyone in my reporting chain who knew things about my personal life or my difficult moments who could have shared them upward? I sat with that question processing, and the answer was Claudia. I reviewed backward with the attention of someone looking for something specific. The conversations I had had with Claudia with the door closed. The moments where she had asked how I was, and I had been honest in ways that in a different context I would not have been. The period 8 months ago when I had gone through a grief process over the loss of my father and had arrived some days with affected energy, and Claudia had been present with the warmth of someone who genuinely cares. The moments of stress the previous year related to a difficult project where I had told her I felt overwhelmed in some weeks. A specific conversation 4 months ago where I had told her I had started therapy because I wanted to have more tools to manage work stress. That last conversation reached me in a specific way because it had been a conversation where I had told her something that in my head was an act of proactivity and self-care. And if that information had reached human resources without context, without my version, without the explanation that seeking therapy proactively is exactly the opposite of instability, it was information that could be misinterpreted in a way that harmed me. I called my labor attorney. His name was Miguel, and he had been handling labor law cases for years. I described the situation. He told me 3 important things. First, that the use of an employee's mental health information in promotion decisions without the employee's consent and without basis in actual performance was a potentially discriminatory practice that in many jurisdictions had specific legal consequences. Second, that before making any move, I needed to document everything that had happened from the human resources meeting backward. Third, that I had the right to request in writing what specific information had been shared about me with human resources and what its source was, and that request was legitimate in the context of a promotion candidacy. I submitted a formal written request to the human resources director. I asked him to inform me what the specific information about my emotional stability he had received was, from whom he had received it, and in what context. The response took 4 days. When it arrived, through the company's legal area, it neither confirmed nor denied the source, but acknowledged that information had been received from an internal source about perceptions of my stress management. The language was careful, but the existence of the information was confirmed. I submitted a second request, this time asking for a meeting with the human resources director, not the director who had been in the first meeting, to discuss the promotion process and the information being considered. The meeting happened a week later. I arrived with Miguel, not aggressively. As the exercise of a right, I had to be accompanied in a meeting that directly affected my career. In that meeting, I said the following: that the information that had reached human resources about my mental health was inaccurate, taken out of context, and used in a way that significantly distorted the reality of my performance and my personal situation. That the fact of having started therapy proactively 4 months ago was evidence of self-care and emotional maturity, not of instability. That the grief period over my father's death 8 months ago was a normal human response to a significant loss, and that during that period my work performance had maintained its standards according to formal evaluations. That if the company had formal evaluations of my performance that showed any deterioration in the mentioned periods, it was the moment to show them. That if it did not, the information that had reached human resources had no basis in actual performance and should have no weight in any promotion decision. The human resources director listened. She asked for time to review my complete evaluation file. What they found in the file was consistent with what I knew. My formal evaluations from the last 2 years had been solid in all the mentioned periods. There was no performance evaluation that showed deterioration in the periods coinciding with my grief or the start of therapy. The information that had reached human resources did not correspond to any formal record of my performance. It was a subjective perception that someone had communicated informally. The company initiated an internal investigation of the process. What the investigation determined, I am going to state with the precision it deserves. Claudia had had conversations with the human resources director who preceded the one I had seen, a man who had been replaced 2 months earlier, where she had expressed concerns about my stress management in the context of the candidacy I was developing. She had used language that suggested emotional instability. She had specifically mentioned the therapy I had told her about, without context, without my version, without clarifying that I had told her in private in the context of a trust conversation. The investigation determined that Claudia had acted contrary to company policies on confidentiality of personal employee information and on the correct process for communicating performance observations. Claudia received a formal reprimand. She was removed from my reporting chain. The process of my promotion was restarted from scratch with the exclusion of any information not supported by formal performance evaluations. The promotion was approved 3 months later, not because of the investigation, but because when the process was done correctly, my profile was solid enough to sustain itself on its own. That was also important information. What cost me most of all of this was not the legal process or the investigation. It was the process of understanding that I had shared things in a space I thought was safe and that space was not. And the backward review of how many conversations had occurred in that space and how deep my exposure had been. That review is uncomfortable in a way that no formal process completely resolves. But what I learned from it changed how I relate to my direct superiors since then. Not in a paranoid way, in a more conscious way about where the line is between a professional trust relationship and a personal one. That line exists even if it is difficult to see in real time. What I want you to take from this story has parts for people in different positions. For anyone who works in an organization and has close relationships with their superiors, the genuine warmth of a superior does not turn the space between you into a private space. What you share in that space can circulate upward without anyone asking your permission. That does not mean you cannot have close relationships with your superiors. It means that what you share in those relationships deserves the same care you would give to any information in a professional environment. Information about your mental health, your personal difficulties, and your vulnerabilities is yours to share or not. And in a work environment, the decision to share requires evaluating not only the person, but the role that person has in your career. For those who work in leadership positions, the personal information someone on your team shares with you is information they give you because they trust you. Using it in any decision or communication related to their career without their consent is a specific betrayal that has legal and organizational consequences in addition to personal ones. And for everyone, if in an evaluation or promotion process something is mentioned about you that does not come from your formal performance evaluations, you have the right to ask where it comes from. That question is legitimate. The answer you receive is information about how the organization you work for functions. If this story impacted you, comment. Are you conscious of the line between what you share with your superiors at work and what could affect your career if it circulates without context? Like if you believe companies should have clearer policies about the confidentiality of mental health information employees share informally with their superiors. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who works in an organization and who might benefit from reflecting on this dynamic. Practical tip: if you are in a promotion process and in any meeting information is mentioned about you that does not come from formal performance evaluations, request in writing what that information is, where it comes from, and in what context it was shared. That request is your right in any process that affects your career. The answer you receive, or the absence of an answer, is valuable information about the process and the organization.